and welcome back to another episode of Twisted Talks. I'm Tanya,
I'm Josh.
and today's case is going to be the case of Theodore Robert Bundy, better known as Ted Bundy. Um, Ted Bundy, I feel like a fairly well known criminal, in my
Yes,
opinion.
definitely.
Um, but if you've not heard of Ted, let us educate you. Now, there is a standard trigger warning for murder with this case, as well as a trigger warning for sexual assault, and I do believe there is minors involved at some point. So, yeah, just buckle
Yeah.
up, lads. It's
Do
a
with
very
that
long
what
case.
you will.
Yeah, Josh, you ready? Take it away.
I am. Let's dive into the very start where it all began, the
Oh
childhood.
yes, give us the backstory.
Um, so Ted Bundy was actually born Theodore Robert Cowell on the 24th of November
Mm-hmm.
1946 in Burlington, Vermont. He was delivered at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers because 1946. Uh,
Big stig-
Bundy, you are?
big stigma.
Yes, exactly, of course. How dare you have a child without a husband? Um, Bundy was the son of Eleanor Louise Cowell, and it was not known who his father was. Now, some accounts say that Bundy's birth certificate says unknown where her father's name should usually be, but other accounts say that it could have been an Air Force veteran or a sailor that was his true daddy. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Eleanor later brought her son to her parents in Philadelphia. Uh, blah, 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 blah. I can't speak. His maternal grandparents raised him as their own adopted child, as they were ashamed that their daughter had birthed a child out of wedlock. So
Oh my
Bundy was
goodness,
told that his mother was his sister,
it's given Desperate
an old,
Housewives. It's give.
yeah.
It's giving Desperate Housewives.
It's giving when Bree
Brie,
pretended that
Brie,
Danielle's baby
Brie. Is
was
that you?
hers. Hi, hon. Um, so yeah, he was told that his mother was his sister, and a lovely old-fashioned case of keeping up appearances. Um,
Yes.
Therefore, for nearly all of his childhood, he genuinely believed that his mother was his sister. So yeah, that's a great
That's
start.
trauma. That's trauma.
Um, Now, Bundy's grandfather, an abusive, racist, and misogynistic man, would often beat Ted and his mother. This caused his mother, Eleanor, to run away, bringing 5-year-old Ted with her to live with cousins in Tacoma, Washington. Eleanor
Mm-hmm.
then met Johnny Bundy at a Methodist church in Tacoma, who was working as a cook in a hospital.
Okay.
Eleanor and Johnny got married, and Johnny then formally adopted Ted, and that's where he got the last name Bundy because he took Johnny's last name, or he was given Johnny's last name.
Okay.
So that's where Bundy comes from. But he's wishing he didn't do no adopting now. Um,
Yeah, probably.
so it seemed that Bundy grew up in a happy working class family.
Mm-hmm.
But at an early age, he showed a strange interest in the macabre, which is like grim or gruesome things. At around 3 years old, can we just I'd like to really like bring that like to what's the word? Highlight that. 3 years old. He was fascinated by knives.
Oh,
Bundy was a
well,
bright but shy child. And while he did well
who
in
love knives?
school, he did not get on well with peers, you know, but
Mm-hmm. Could
knives.
that be the knife
So,
obsession?
you know, that could be a part. I feel like that's a bit strange. I think I liked dinosaurs when I was 3. Um
uh, yeah, probably.
So Ted Bundy displayed signs of mental disturbance from a young age. Relatives of Bundy's recalled how he would sneak into his grandfather's greenhouse to read his pornography. Multiple
Oh,
times, yeah, multiple times when Bundy was only 3 years of age, he had placed butcher knives under the covers next to his 15-year-old aunt while she was in bed.
oh my God!
Yeah,
This little psycho.
like 3 years of age, and he's there. Oh, look, a butcher knife would look nice in the bed beside you. Don't roll over.
This child is like Chucky personified.
Yeah,
Chucky
I'm
wishes he was childhood Ted Bundy.
literally like, I'm Ted Bundy did not like his stepfather, and he later unkindly described him to a girlfriend, saying that his stepfather was not very bright and did not make much money. Um, so yeah, that's cute. Not much else is definitively known about the rest of Bundy's childhood, as he's given conflicting accounts of his earlier years to different biographers. In general, Bundy had described an ordinary life, but that he had dark fantasies that powerfully affected him. Um, The degree to which he acted on them, however, is unclear.
Mm.
Um, then in Bundy's teenage years, a darker side started to come through because 3-year-old playing with knives wasn't enough. He
Yeah.
liked to watch people through their windows, especially women and girls changing, and he had no problem stealing what he wanted from other people, as well as going through neighbours' rubbish looking for adult publications.
What the I think he just wanted porn.
Yeah, even if
He
it was
wanted
in
the
the
porn.
trash. He wanted to root through their trash cans and find their jizz stained magazines. Um, so at around this time, he also began to frequently read detective magazines that had graphic photos of female victims. These magazines
Oh,
detailed the awful events, but they also explained how the perpetrators got away with them.
of
So,
course. So smart.
I guess how to get away with murder for dummies. I don't know. Bundy's reputation for stealing did, however, get him in trouble twice during his time at high school. He was arrested for suspicion of burglary as well as a suspicion of, I don't know whether it was suspicion or definitive on auto theft. I think that one was definitive. Um, Luckily for Bundy, by the time he graduated high school, his record was expunged. Had it not been,
Mm.
maybe because if it hadn't been expunged, he might not have been able to get into college after high school.
Yeah.
Um, it is suspected that Bundy could have been to blame for the 1961 disappearance of Anne Marie Burr. At the time Anne Marie went missing, Bundy was only 14 years old. Anne Marie was 8 years old and went missing in late August of 1961. A body was never found. She reportedly disappeared close to Bundy's childhood home in Tacoma. Many believe Anne Marie was Bundy's first victim. He only lived a few blocks from her home, and neighbors had seen someone lurking around outside the house in the days that led up to Anne Marie's disappearance. Bundy denied the charge, I suppose later when asked. But,
Yeah.
I suppose there's no evidence. He was 14. Maybe he had started already, but, maybe he hadn't.
But
So I don't know.
yeah, but we don't
Do
know.
with
We
that
would
what you
probably,
will. Um, However, an author later claimed that Bundy had confessed to it while he was being interviewed in prison. Bundy's final attorney said that Bundy had admitted to taking over 100 lives and specified that not all of them were adult women, but we may never know for certain if Bundy is to blame for Anne Marie's disappearance. But it does sound like it is a possibility, in my opinion.
yeah,
Um,
like he
because
was
like he was
upset
already
with
playing
it.
with knives at 3. Give him another 11 years, and what's he going to be doing?
Yeah, like you progress really high from that on the scale
Yeah,
of psychopathy.
Bundy attended Woodrow Wilson High School. Um, he said in an interview later in life, of course, that he remembered his high school years as isolated. He claimed that he chose to be alone and preferred to be alone. He said he focused on schoolwork as an excuse to hide from social situations which he feared. Bundy told the true crime writer Anne Rule, I didn't know what made people want to be friends. I didn't know what underlay social interactions. Bundy, for the book Ted Bundy Conversations with a Killer, told Stephen McCaud and Hugh Ainsworth, in my earlier schooling, it seemed like there was no problem in learning what the appropriate social behaviours were. It just seemed that I reached a wall, as it were, in high school. However, even though
Mm.
Bundy described himself as a loner who would stalk the seedy streets at night to spy on women, many people who remember Bundy from high school described him as reasonably well known and well liked. One former classmate referred to him as a medium sized fish in a large pond. Sure, he wasn't the most popular, but he was definitely not a social outcast. And Ted Bundy graduated from his high school in 1965. And then Tana, take it over.
Okay. So, as Josh said, Ted graduated from Woodrow Wilson High School in 1965 and he began studying at the University of Puget Sound, or UPS. And he was here for a year before he moved to the University of Washington, where he studied Chinese. Now, according to Anne Rule, who Josh mentioned was a true crime writer and later was a co worker of Bundy's, she said Bundy told her, quote, that he felt, sorry, quote, that China was a country he would one day have to reckon with and that a fluency in the language would one day be imperative. And it was
Reckon
here
with. What are you going to do? Take on the government, the way
honestly,
he's talking.
he had he had delusions of grandeur. So It was here at the University of Washington that Bundy met and began dating Diane Edwards, and this was in 1967. Diane, who is often referred to using pseudonyms like Stephanie Brooks in Bundy literature, was a wealthy brunette from California who, according to biography.com, had everything he wanted: money, class, and influence. In
Of course.
1968, of course, he was obsessed with like self-image, is what I was seeing in my research. And he
Yeah,
really,
and I even
really
gathered that through the whole
craved,
thing.
yeah, like he really craved that like successful, wealthy, like polished kind of image almost.
But like, I think it's so strange that like he was craving all that, because then at the same time, it's like equally he does not give a flying fuck what other people think.
Yeah.
So it's
Like he
like this
doesn't
is
care about
clearly,
society.
yeah, it's like he just wants to look that way because that's literally the life he wants to lead, while also being a bit of a psychopath on the side.
Yeah. I also think it kind of might stem from a place of like he views those people in a certain light and he wants to be seen in that light or something.
Yeah, it's a
Um
hard one to decipher.
yeah, so in 1968, Bundy dropped Chinese as he had lost interest, and he began studying urban planning and sociology before he dropped out of the University of Washington altogether. And he worked a variety of minimum wage jobs. And this is also when he began volunteering at the Seattle office of Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign, which led to him being appointed as a bodyguard and driver for Arthur Fletcher during his
A
campaign.
bodyguard. Oh Christ.
A bodyguard. Ted Bundy, the bodyguard,
Where's
for
Whitney?
Arthur Fletcher. Sorry?
I said, where's Whitney?
Where's Whitney? Whitney! So that was during Arthur Fletcher's campaign for Lieutenant Governor of Washington State. And then in August 1968, Bundy was invited to and attended the 1968 Republican National Convention in Miami
Fancy.
as a delegate of Rockefeller, of Nelson Rockefeller. And shortly after his return from the event, Diane Edwards broke up with him and moved back to her family home in California because she had grown frustrated with Bundy's lack of motivation and ambition and his immaturity. Now, this is something that psychiatrist Dorothy Otnow Lewis would later point to as, quote, probably the pivotal time in his development. So Bundy was understandably devastated by this breakup, so he decided he would travel to Colorado and then on to Arkansas and Philadelphia to visit some of his relatives. Now, while he was in Philadelphia, he enrolled in Temple University for a semester, but I couldn't find what he was studying. And it's also believed that around this time he traveled to the Office of Birth Records in Burlington to find details regarding his parents. Now, after traveling for a while, Bundy decided to return to education, and so he enrolled at the University of Washington again, but this time he chose to major in psychology. And this was something that Bundy was very interested in, and he loved to talk about it. This time he stuck it out and he achieved his undergraduate degree in 1972. A year before he graduated, he began working at the Seattle Suicide Hotline Crisis Center. Let that sink in.
Oh yeah, yeah, I have that down as well.
That's just
Yeah,
that
that's where
blew
he met Anne
my.
Rule.
Yeah, I was just that's my next line, Josh.
Girl, you're
God.
jumping ahead in the years.
And this is where he met Anne Rule, who I mentioned earlier and who Josh mentioned earlier. Bundy was obsessed with image and prestige, as we said, and wanted to attend a prestigious law school, but he couldn't due to his mediocre LSAT scores. So he took classes 3 nights a week at the University of Puget Sound's School of Law. Bundy would eventually be accepted to the University of Utah's law school in 1973, but this was more to do with the glowing recommendation of the then governor, Daniel Evans, whose election campaign Bundy had worked on. So he was quite involved in politics. And I don't really understand politics, so I just kept it to the minimum of what it needs for you to get the story.
Yeah.
Now, after about a year of studying, Bundy once again dropped out of university. Now, in 1969, Bundy met Elizabeth Klopfer. Elizabeth was a single mother who worked as a secretary at the University of Washington Medical School. The two met in a bar and clicked, so they started dating. Elizabeth described the relationship as hot and cold, saying, quote, "We would be getting along fine, and then a door would slam and I would be out in the cold until Ted was ready to let me back in. I'd spend hours trying to figure out what I had done or said that was wrong, and then suddenly he would be warm and loving again, and I would feel needed and cared for," end quote. The two almost married at one point. They obtained a marriage license, but when Elizabeth asked him to move his stuff out of her apartment because she was worried that it was going to upset her conservative parents who were coming to visit, Bundy became really like irate, telling her if she was that hung up on what her parents thought, then she wasn't ready for marriage. So he ripped up the marriage license. And my last little section here. So we're just going to jump back to Diane Edwards for a second, which was Bundy's first girlfriend. The two ended up reconnecting in 1973, and Diane was extremely impressed by this new, motivated version of Bundy. He seemed to be on track to gain a promising career in law, and he was really involved in politics, and so they started dating again. Now, at this time, Bundy was still dating Elizabeth Klopfer, but the two had no idea about each other. And Diane would fly to Seattle to visit him, and they would spend time together, and everything seemed to be going well. And then Bundy just straight up stopped returning her calls. Like all of a sudden out of the blue, and she finally got hold of him a month later and asked why he had ended their relationship so suddenly, and he responded with, "Diane, I have no idea what you mean," and hung up on her. Like Ted Bundy invented ghosting, and he was the king of gaslighting.
Yeah, so there's that.
Yeah, so that's that.
That's Bundy
Yeah.
highlighting some gaslighting ghosting.
Mhm.
Um, so it is not certain when or where Bundy began murdering women. He has told different stories to different people, as well as refused to give the specifics of his earliest crimes. He even confessed in graphic detail to dozens of later murders in the days leading up to his execution. Bundy told
Mhm.
Polly Nelson, his last defense attorney and the author of the book Defending the Devil, My Story as Ted Bundy's Last Lawyer, that he had attempted his first kidnapping in 1969 in Ocean City, New Jersey, but that he did not kill anyone until 1971 in Seattle. Bundy also told Art Norman, a psychologist, that he had killed two women in Atlantic City while he was visiting family in Philadelphia in 1969. He also hinted to Robert D. Capel, a homicide detective and author of the book The Riverman, Ted Bundy and I Hunt for the Green River Killer, that he committed a murder in Seattle in 1972 and another murder in 1973 involving a hitchhiker near Tumwater. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but Bundy refused to go into any more detail or into detail at all, really. Now, Anne Rule again, a true crime author, as we know, who knew Bundy from working in the Seattle Crisis Clinic in 1971. So Anne and Robert Keppel both believe that Bundy may have started killing in his teenage years. Bundy's earliest documented homicides were in 1974 when he was 27. Bundy
Mhm.
himself admitted he had by then mastered the required skills to leave minimal incriminating forensic evidence at crime scenes, because this was obviously before DNA profiling was even a thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
like the forensics.
basically, he probably started as a teenager,
Yeah. That's
but
mad.
that's not definitive. That's just, I
Yeah,
suppose,
it's not.
speculation, but likely speculation.
That's just our opinion.
Yeah, exactly, and it's a fairly broad opinion. Like that's the opinion of Anne Rule and Robert Capel as well. So and
Yeah.
yeah, but anyway, that's only a little kind of snippet. That was just kind of like a little entry
Well,
into murder, if you will.
introduction.
Yes, and now over to you, my dear.
I'm ready. So, sorry, I just heard touching against the door. So we
Daisy
are
is
heading
her
to,
doggy, in case anyone didn't know that. She's not keeping a
yeah,
hostage.
I promise. So we're heading to Washington, Oregon. And on January 4th, 1974, Karen Sparks was sleeping soundly in her basement bedroom when Bundy snuck in and viciously attacked her, like viciously. Now, just a few hours before, she had actually seen a man looking through her window, but had brushed it off as her imagination. but police now think that this was Bundy stalking her.
And that
So
fits his
Bundy,
MO as well. When he was younger, he loved watching in through windows,
of being a little peeping Tom, a peeping
you know,
a peeping Ted.
getting his
Um,
spunk magazines and whatnot.
ugh, yuck. So Bundy bludgeoned Karen with a metal rod from her bed before sexually assaulting her with either a metal speculum, which Karen says actually split her bladder.
Oh my
Um,
God.
yeah. Now, it's thought that the sound of one of Karen's housemates talking in his sleep scared Bundy off, and this ultimately saved Karen's life. She
Well,
was
thank God
found
for night
hours,
talking.
yeah, like sleep talking, it can be helpful. So, Karen was found hours later by one of her housemates and spent the next 10 days in hospital unconscious. Though she survived, she was left with damage to her brain, which resulted in her not being able to remember much of the attack. A few
Yeah.
weeks later, in the early hours
And
of
even if you don't
February,
get damage to your brain, sometimes you're not going to remember things simply out of trauma as well, even like
yeah, like
regardless.
you,
Do you know? So
that,
like it's awful to get the brain. Well, obviously it's awful what happened, full stop. But
yeah,
also like it's like to not be able to, obviously it's a horrible thing that you probably don't want to remember, but in terms of being able to like accurately report it in the hopes of the person being found.
yeah, like it's, it's just, it's hard. It's, I can think of like, it's such a, it's awful.
Yeah.
Um, so a few weeks later, in the early hours of February 1st, one of Linda Ann Healy's housemates was woken up by the sound of an alarm clock. She entered Linda's room to check on her, but assumed that she had already gone to work. But when Linda's boss called the house a few hours later to ask why she hadn't been at work that day, her housemates became concerned. They called Linda's father and brother and explained the situation, leading Linda's mother to immediately call the police. When the Seattle Police Department responded to the be very neat with her bed made up. Now, her roommates noted this to be very odd because Linda wouldn't make the bed on days where she was working and she never tucked her pillow under the blankets. She always put it on top.
Yeah. So like someone
Lieutenant,
else made that bed.
exactly. So Lieutenant Pat Murphy pulled the blankets back and found blood on the pillow and head area of the bed. Linda's nightgown was hanging in the wardrobe with blood all over its neck. Her housemates confirmed that her clothes from the night before, a pink satin pillowcase, her backpack, and her house keys were missing, and that the back door was open, which was again unusual because Linda would prefer to use the side door when she was coming home. Now, it appeared to police that someone who we now know to be Ted Bundy broke in, attacked Linda, dressed her, made her bed, and took her without leaving a trace. Now, while it's unclear if it was Bundy responsible, there were two incidents. So it's unclear if he's responsible for these incidents that I'm about to talk to you about.
Okay.
So the first was that while Linda was at a laundromat a few days before, she had noticed a man in an orange pickup truck stop and stare at her before he entered the laundromat without any clothes to be washed. He fooled around with a machine for a few minutes before checking the back door of the laundromat and leaving. Linda told one of her roommates that this had scared her. And then the second incident was when Linda was home alone and had heard her neighbour's dog barking. So she peeked outside and she saw a man standing on the lower step of her house, holding the dog by the neck and shaking it. So Linda ran outside to find her neighbours shouting at the man who claimed the dog had attacked him before he ran off. Now, during the first,
I don't know what I make of that because I'm like, it could have been, but I'm like, it also sounds,
yeah,
even though it's the earlier days, it sounds a little bit sloppy for him,
yeah, like, yeah, I don't know.
but it could have been.
Um,
It's hard to tell.
yeah, no, I don't think he would have directly just tried to walk into the house in the middle of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Especially with a dog giving out and also him holding the dog and like shaking the dog. And also, I've not heard any reports of him ever driving an orange pickup truck for it to have been him in the laundromat. But again, who knows?
yeah. So during the first half of 1974, it's calculated that women were disappearing at the rate of about one woman per month. So Donna Gale Manson was on her way to a jazz concert at the library on Evergreen State Campus at around 7 p.m. on March 12th, 1974. Donna was known to be a bit of a party girl, and it wasn't uncommon for her to disappear for days or weeks at a time. which is why she wasn't reported missing until March 18th, when one of her friends was starting to worry. Now, not much is known about how Bundy abducted Donna. This was the first time he had chosen not to attack in his victims' bedrooms, um, something that was thought by police to be a forensic countermeasure. It's thought he either offered her free weed or used his trusty injury ruse, which is where he would pretend to have some kind of injury and ask for help. Now, Donna's body has never been found, and Bundy claims to have burned her skull in Elizabeth Copfer's fireplace.
Oh my
Um,
God.
yeah. On April 17th, 1974, Susan Rancourt was due to attend a meeting at Munson Hall at the Central Washington University. The meeting was for undergraduates who wanted to become resident assistants. At 10 p.m., after the meeting finished, Susan began the journey back to her dorm room as she was supposed to meet a friend to watch a movie. But Susan never made it back to her dorm, and she never picked up the laundry that she had been doing before she went to the meeting. Two witnesses reported seeing a man with a sling in the area, and it's thought that this is how Bundy lured Susan in. It's thought that Bundy had spotted Susan and made his way over to her before dropping a stack of books he was holding. Susan offered to help him, and Bundy accepted. Susan helped Bundy carry the books to his car, and as she leaned in to place the books down in the back seat, he hit her on the back of the head with a crowbar, bundled her into the car, and drove off. Police were immediately notified of Susan's disappearance, but were unable to find any evidence. Sorry, I'm a bit caught for breath. On May 6th, it's the asthma
Hey,
and the
Elthama.
sinus infection. On May
See
6th,
news.
1974, Roberta Parks went missing from Oregon State University in Corvallis. Roberta had been having a difficult day as she had just found out that her father had suffered a heart attack, and she was riddled with guilt over an argument that they'd had 2 days before, as well as stressing about her relationship, as she and her boyfriend seemed to want different things in life. She was seen walking between her dorm at Sackett Hall and the common area of the Memorial Union building, and she met a friend on the way who she told she was going to get a hot fudge sundae. But Roberta was never seen again after this.
What
By
a
now, the
fucking week she
authorities,
was having.
yeah,
Oh my God.
honestly, poor Roberta. Now, by this point, the authorities and the media were starting to take note of this startling trend regarding the disappearances. So, in the space of 4 months, Linda Ann Healy, Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt, and Roberta Parks had gone missing. All college students between the ages of 18 and 21 who had gone missing from campuses near highways with no significant evidence left behind. On June 1st, 1974, Brenda Carroll Ball disappeared after leaving the Flame Tavern in Burien, I think, near the Seattle Tacoma International Airport. The last reported sighting of Brenda was in the car park where she was talking to a brown haired man who had a sling on his arm. On June 11th, 1974, Georgianne Hawkins went missing. She had gone to visit her boyfriend at his dorm, which was only 6 buildings away from her sorority house at the University of Washington. Georgianne's roommate contacted her boyfriend at 2 a.m. when she hadn't returned, and he said she had left an hour earlier at 1 a.m. When she still wasn't home by the early morning, the police were called and they began investigating. A house mother on campus reported hearing a scream just after 1 a.m. on June 11th, but said she had put it down to students playing a prank and went back to sleep. Bundy has said he lured Georgianne by wearing a fake cast and asking for her help with his briefcase before hitting her over the head and knocking her unconscious. He said she woke in the car at one point, and so he hit her again, knocking her unconscious, and then he strangled her. Now, I wasn't sure where exactly to put this, but according to an LA Times article that I read during my research, Bundy was actually working as the assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission when
No.
he started murdering. And get this, he wrote a pamphlet for women about rape prevention. And by the time he had killed Georgianne Hawkins, he was working at the Washington State Department of Emergency Services in Olympia, which is a government agency involved in the search for missing women.
He was really, really good at getting himself into places that would like
I swear,
help
this man,
him.
what the fuck? But anyway, while he was working there, he met Carol Ann Boone, who will be mentioned later on. On Sunday, July 14th, 1974, Bundy decided he was going to take him a little trip to Lake Sammamish State Park in Issaquah. He wore a white tennis outfit and a cast on his arm. And he
Standard.
approached several women, introducing himself as Ted and asking them to help him unhook his boat from his car. Now, I remember in one of our past episodes, I kind of generalized a little bit, which I didn't mean to. If a man asks you for help, be suspicious. But this is what I meant. If a man comes to you and asks you to like help him unhook his boat, walk away, run away.
Like, but like, I'm just like, as well, I'm like, what would, like, why are you even out here trying to do your boat when you've got a cast on your arm? Like, what?
Like, were you asking for an accident? I hope you got insurance. So most of the women refused, but Janice Ott agreed to help him and followed him back to his car. After this, she was never seen again. 4 hours after this, Denise Naslund went to use the public bathroom after an argument with her boyfriend. Her friends, her boyfriend, and her dog waited for her until the park closed. And when she still hadn't returned at that point, they called the police. So he took 2 women in the space of 4 hours.
He wasn't wasting any time.
No. Now, exhaustive searches were conducted, but as with all of Bundy's victims so far, there was no sign of the women. After the Lake Sammamish abductions, the police were finally armed with a composite sketch, which they released to the public in the form of newspapers and local television, as well as flyers posted throughout the Seattle area. Elizabeth Klopfer, Anne Rule, a Department of Emergency Services employee and a University of Washington psychology professor, all recognized the sketch as Bundy, as well as the car, because they had like the information about his little beetle, his little bug.
I did not know any of that part.
And reported this, but the detectives were receiving up to 200 tips per day, fair enough, and thought it was unlikely that a, quote, clean-cut law student who had no adult criminal record would be their man.
And I suppose he had his reputation of working in politics. And in law stuff, in searches and stuff, like you said, and whatever. So he, on paper, he was like, oh, it couldn't be him.
In terms of like public image and keeping up an image, Kris Jenner works hard, but Ted Bundy works harder. He puts Kris Jenner to shame, honestly. Anyway, child, let's go. So on September 6th,
lives in a pineapple under the sea.
SpongeBob SquarePants. So on September 6th, 1974, 2 grouse hunters, I don't even know what grouse is,
neither do I,
discovered skeletal remains near a service road on the outskirts of Issaquah. And this, of course, led to an investigation, which led to the discovery of a number of human bones, which were spread out over a wide area due to disturbance from the local wildlife. Investigators found a skull, spine, mandible, pelvis, 5 femurs, and teeth, along with a number of other bones. The remains were confirmed as those of Janice Ann Ott and Denise Marie Naslund, the 2 women that were abducted at Lake Sammamish. Bundy later claimed that he had also buried Georgianne Hawkins here, but at that time, police could not identify remains without the skull or mandible, and unfortunately, by the time DNA testing was advanced enough to confirm Georgianne's presence at the scene, the bones had been cremated by the bones had been cremated by a coroner according to policies at the time, which stated
because I suppose at the time they're not going to know that science is going to
advance
go
as much as it has.
For advance, that's the word, so much that they can later find out.
So the policy at the time was that unidentified bones would be cremated if they had been in storage for too long. So on March 1st, 1975, forestry students discovered the remains of Linda Ann Healy, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, and Brenda Carroll Ball on Taylor Mountain in Washington. Investigators initially believed that the victims had been decapitated, as they thought only the skulls were human, but DNA testing on bones rediscovered at the King County Medical Examiner's Office disproved this. The remains showed signs of blunt force trauma, and Donna Manson's remains have never been found. So it's your turn, Josh. Your
There's oh perfect. There's actually so much of that in this case about people not being found or identified. It's awful.
It really is.
Um
It's like there's no real sense of closure for the families.
yeah, and it's like at the end of the day, it's like fair enough if Bundy might have admitted later in life to, let's say the murder of such and such. Like, does that mean
Mm.
like is he just claiming for the sake of it and that is what happened to them? Like, how do you take someone like that for their word?
Yeah, like it's really difficult to separate fact from fiction with
Yeah,
Bundy, with most
um,
serial killers.
yeah, exactly, 100%. Um, So then, in 1974, the same year as his first official murder, so remember, he could have been murdering long before, but the
Yeah.
first official one, Bundy moved to Utah to study law at the University of Utah Law School, leaving Elizabeth, how did you pronounce it? Klopfer? Klopfer?
Cloakfur.
Leaving Elizabeth
Cloakfur.
Klopfer in Seattle. Most accounts of him moving to Utah say early September. It is said that while he called Elizabeth often, he dated at least a dozen other women. Um, So, yeah, there's that.
He's a playboy.
Um, anyway, as Bundy studied the first year law curriculum for the second time, he was devastated to realize that the other students, quote, some intellectual capacity, unquote, that he did not have. He found the classes impossible to understand, and Bundy said it was a great disappointment to me. Um,
Oh,
it was, yeah, we don't like
getting
disappointments, I don't think,
generous
when we're
then.
Bundy. Um,
No.
it was it was on his way to Salt Lake City that Bundy would take his next victim. On the outskirts of Boise, Bundy saw a young woman with a green backpack who was hitchhiking at the top of the ramp of the freeway. Even though he
Mm.
wasn't actually in the city of Boise yet, this part of the interstate or the freeway went through a neighborhood that Bundy would later say had ranch style suburban houses in view. So I suppose almost like an outskirts, even maybe. Um,
Oh,
it was early in the evening when he pulled into the emergency lane and motioned the young woman over to his car, which was full of his belongings because obviously he was moving. Uh, as
yes.
we know, he was driving his standard Volkswagen Beetle.
Of
Um,
course, his baby.
his baba, Bundy, having classic good looks and charming smile, would put any
Excuse me.
hitchhiker at ease. Yeah, but I suppose that's when you didn't know he was a raging psychopathic serial killer. Um,
I just don't think he's good looking at all.
I don't, but I think he has good looks in the sense of that time period.
I suppose, yeah.
Um, I wouldn't say he's modern day good looking, but I'd say he's 1950s, 1960s, and 70s good looking.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and Charming Smile would apparently put any hitchhiker at ease, because they wouldn't feel like they need to be scared or hesitate.
Mm, to be
So the
fair,
woman,
Bundy was like described as very charismatic by all accounts.
and then when you come across someone that like seems really nice and charismatic as well, it almost makes them seem more attractive, even to the extent of their looks.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
Just the same as equally said the other way around. If someone's an awful horrible cunt, it makes them look. You
Mm-hmm.
start to find them physically less attractive. Um,
Yeah.
or at least with me anyway. Um,
Yeah.
but so obviously without not feeling any fear or hesitation, the woman returned a smile and got into the passenger side of his car. The
Mm-hmm.
woman was soon conversing with her chauffeur on what would sadly be her last car ride of her life. Um,
Oh.
Bundy stopped to refuel the car for a third time that day, but this time within the city limits of Boise. For around roughly the next 3 to 4 hours, they stayed on Interstate 84, which at the time was actually under construction, some of it being modern highway and some of it being an older and narrower road. So this gave
Okay.
Bundy the perfect opportunity for what he had planned because it gave him easy access to a nearby river from one of the many turnoffs that
Oh,
connected to the older highway. Highway says me, the older highway.
the older highway.
So Bundy had been keeping an eye on the body of water as him and the woman chatted, and it would be one of these turnoffs that Bundy would, using some excuse, go down while the unsuspecting passenger may, for the first time, have begun to feel kind of scared and be like, "What's going on?"
Yeah, to kind of
Um,
be like, okay, this something's not right.
yeah, like getting that gut instinct probably by now.
Yeah.
Um, it was at this point that Bundy carefully grabbed a crowbar from underneath the passenger seat slowly taking it off of the floor, but not raising it high enough for the woman to see. He looked around,
Oh,
saw nothing but the dark of the night, so he quickly bashed the crowbar into the right back part of the woman's skull, and the
oh my
blow did
God.
serious damage to her cranium and it knocked her unconscious. Um, Now,
Poor girl.
however, she was still alive, just unconscious at this
Mm-hmm.
point, with obviously damage to the head, which is
Yeah.
what Bundy wanted. He didn't want her to be dead.
He didn't want to
He
kill her, he just wanted to incapacitate her.
Exactly. He stopped the car, dragged her unconscious body to a spot not far from his car, removed all of her clothing, and
Mm-hmm.
Bundy, being highly aroused, would have sex with her,
Oh,
possibly anal as well,
oh,
and finished by strangling her to death during the act of sodomy.
oh
He
my
may have stayed
God.
with her for a little while. Yeah, yeah, like, oh. He may have stayed with her for a little while after, as he wanted to savor what he had done. Before Bundy
Oh,
left her body, he would likely have intercourse with the corpse at least once. Um,
oh,
but
I
Bundy
forgot
would
to give a
then,
trigger warning for Ophelia.
oh yeah,
Sorry
well,
about that.
you know,
You know now, there's
yeah,
necrophilia involved. Sorry.
sorry. Um, so Bundy then put the body into the river and then all of her clothes. Um, Before making his way back to his car through the dark with a flashlight. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, all the clothes and body into the river, and then use the flashlight to get back to the car. And this victim has still not been identified. Um,
Oh,
I
that's
think it was
all. I
just
hate when
confessed.
they, yeah, like I hate when there's no identification because it just feels like there's no real justice for that victim because we know he did it to someone, but like
But who is
she
it,
probably
and
has
what? Where
family
are
out
they? Like,
there. She has family out there that don't know what happened to her, and the world doesn't know that it was her that it happened to.
yeah. And then it's like you wonder, and like and it could have even been someone who didn't have family, and then that's like even sad because like
Yeah,
there's nobody even trying to find them, even
yeah,
even find their
exactly.
remains. Um, When questioned by investigators 14 years later, Bundy said that after killing her, he had buried her identification and could not remember her name. He estimated that she was likely between 16 and 18 years old, said she had
Oh,
light brown hair, probably lived in Boise, and that Wyoming could have been where she had wanted to go. Bundy said he did not throw her backpack into the river. He brought that with him to Salt Lake City and threw it out of his car window in an area where there were already kind of many things dumped there, so it kind of just blended in because it wasn't
yeah,
unusual to see items thrown around that area. Um, why he felt the need to bring that with him, I don't know, especially if he was just dumping it anyway. But
yeah.
I
But I
don't
suppose
know.
in case her body like washed up or anything near there.
Yeah, possibly, potentially. Um, Then on the 2nd of October 1974, 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox disappeared after leaving her home on Arnott Drive in Holiday, which is a small city just outside of Salt Lake City.
Mm-hmm.
At first, Nancy's parents and the police, as per fucking usual, had presumed that she had run away.
Of course.
Now, to be fair, was it these guys? I think they actually may have had reason, but we'll get to that. But there is someone where okay, fair enough, them thinking that it could have been a runaway, but I'm not sure it's this one, but we'll see. At
Okay.
this time, nobody in Utah had thought that the man who had been terrorizing Seattle was now living amongst them in Utah. Now, as they did not believe Nancy to be in danger at that time and just another runaway, the sheriff's juvenile division did not release a public appeal. Bear in mind, she disappeared in October. Division did not release a public appeal until December of that year, and at that they still
Oh
stressed that
my
Nancy might still be a
God.
runaway. Yeah. So, like, not
Oh
only did it take two
my
months,
God.
they still said that it's possible she was a runaway even 2 months later. And I get it. I get it. Just because someone's gone 2 months, that could just mean they're a successful runaway, do you know? But still.
Yeah, but still.
Now, Nancy was a cheerleader. She did cheerleading. She had blonde hair, and according to a witness, she was last seen as a passenger in a yellow Volkswagen Beetle. If this
Oh, I wonder
sighting
who
was
that
valid,
was.
exactly, and if that was a valid sighting, then Bundy must have talked Nancy into leaving with him, which would not have been a difficult task for him when he was the kind of person that was able to use his charisma and charm whenever he needed it, and
Yeah.
was clearly good at using it. Um,
Yeah, he's a
Years
master
later,
manipulator.
yeah, master manipulator. Years later, Bundy confessed to Salt Lake County Sheriff's detective that he did murder Nancy Wilcox. And apparently his confession to the detective matches a scenario of events that he had described to a writer in the third person. Now, this way of describing, the
Mm-hmm.
reason he described two writers in third person was so that he could discuss the murders without implicating himself in them.
Yeah,
Very, very smart. Um,
I'm sure I have that
Bundy
somewhere as well.
claims, sorry,
I'm sure I have that somewhere in my research as well.
yeah, like so smart. Uh, Bundy claims that he had seen Nancy walking down a dark street one evening, and his intention was to sexually assault her, with the
Of
belief he could
course.
satisfy his urges and that murdering her was not necessary. Bundy parked his car, grabbed a knife, and ran up behind Nancy. After he had forced her off of the footpath and into a darkened orchard, he tried to remove her clothing, but Nancy actually attempted to stop him. Bundy claims that she didn't really believe he would harm her, and because she kept arguing with him, getting louder and louder with her pleas for him to stop, he put a hand over her mouth, but this didn't keep her quiet either. So he began to choke her with the intention of making her pass out.
Mm-hmm.
Once she was quiet, Bundy then removed her clothing, then his own clothing, and had sex with her. He claims
Mm-hmm.
that it was only a few hours later, when he returned to the spot and found the body in the same place that he had left it, that he knew for sure that he had actually killed her and not just made her lose consciousness. Now, while Bundy would like it to be believed that he was sincerely unaware he committed another murder, the facts say otherwise. Since Bundy admitted to having killed Nancy Wilcox that night, and if it happened the way he said it did, then
Mm-hmm.
he had strangled her before taking her clothes off and having intercourse with her. When he would have undressed Nancy, he would have been greeted with the smell of defecation and urine once the body ceased to function. There's a small to
Yes.
zero chance that he could have gone ahead with raping her and not been aware of her condition.
Yeah, like he
Um,
knew.
yeah, so like, okay, maybe his intention wasn't to, but like you knew.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Once Nancy would have stopped spasming from being suffocated, Bundy would have also been very aware of the sudden and complete loss of movement, which always happens when someone has just died.
Yes.
It was clear by now that Bundy enjoyed dead women more than living, and would have been fully aware of
Ugh.
when and would have been fully aware of when this transformation from life to death took place with each of his victims, because he would not have missed that moment, because I suppose that was like a kick for him. Um,
Yeah.
Now it is clear that he killed Nancy just like he had killed others, even if at first his intention had been to rape and not murder her. Not that
Yeah.
rape is, yeah, that's just as bad, but okay.
Yeah. But I know what you mean.
Um, the fact that he caused her death as well as sexually assaulting her only added to his depraved pleasure. Despite
Mm-hmm.
Bundy saying before his execution that he had buried Nancy near Capitol Reef National Park in Wayne County, which is around 200 miles south of Salt Lake City, Nancy Wilcox's body was never found. Um, it's just so many of the bodies not being
Yeah,
found. Like,
like
it's just
it's
awful. Um, Hang on. Oh yeah. The next disappearance was 17-year-old Melissa Smith, a high school senior. She had hazel eyes and dark brown hair. On the 18th of October, 1974, Melissa met her father, Louis Smith,
mm-hmm.
um, wait for this, who was the Midvale chief of police,
Oh,
at a restaurant, persuading him to give her $2 for pizza and permission to stay at a female friend's house that night. Sometime after 10 p.m. that night, Melissa became another victim of Ted Bundy. And 9 days
mm-hmm.
later, Melissa's bludgeoned body was found by deer hunters on the hillside in Summit Park. Bundy had raped, beaten, and strangled Melissa to death before dragging her body down the hillside and dumped the body in some scrub oak. The site her body was found at was 23 miles from the pizza parlor that Melissa had last been seen at. An unconfirmed report suggests that Bundy may have been asking women in the area to assist him with a car problem. Standard. Um,
Mm.
Melissa was meant to stay at a friend's that night, but those plans fell through, so she decided to walk home from the pizza parlor. And obviously, at some point during that walk, Bundy managed to abduct her before she could make it home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's on Melissa. So then on the 31st of October, 17-year-old Laura Ann Aim was at a cafe in Leahy before becoming another of Bundy's victims. Later in the night, she left the cafe alone, and this would be the last time Laura was seen alive. Laura was wearing blue jeans, a sweater, and a hooded coat. Laura regularly kept in touch with her family via phone, so when Aim's family couldn't locate her at first, they didn't think much of it. Laura had become quite the wanderer, and her parents were learning to kind of, deal with it. They weren't necessarily the
I
happiest
suppose,
about it, but, she's
but you gotta do
trying to
what you gotta
become her
do.
own person. Um, they
Yeah.
knew she would. Oh, excuse me. They knew she would call, that it would just be a matter of time. However, when Laura did not show up for a planned hunting trip with her father, the family knew something was wrong. Laura wouldn't miss this, and she especially wouldn't miss it without at least calling to say that she wouldn't be there.
If
Um,
you wouldn't be there, she'd be late.
yeah, exactly. Almost 1 month later, on the 27th of November, two hikers saw the body of 17-year-old Laura at the bottom of a creek bank in American Fork Canyon. Laura's body was lying
Mm.
face down with a nylon stocking tightly wrapped around her neck. The two people who had come across her body left the scene straight away and drove to the nearest ranger station. During the investigation, it was determined that Laura's killer had struck her over the head, raped her, and then strangled her to death before dumping her body down the side of the embankment. Um, then we move on to the 8th of November, 1974. 18-year-old Carol DeRonch was looking around at the new Fashion Place mall when an undercover police officer told her they had arrested a man breaking into her car in the parking lot of the mall. Carol's car seemed perfectly fine, but the man claiming to be a police officer convinced her to come with him to the police station. Once they were inside his scruffy Volkswagen, Carol could smell
Mm.
alcohol on the officer's breath and noticed that he was not driving towards the police station, so as soon as the car was stopped, she attempted to jump out. The man immediately slapped a handcuff on one wrist. Um, Carol desperately struggled, and the second handcuff clicked onto the same wrist. Having been threatened with a gun as well as a crowbar, she screamed and scratched until she finally managed to get out of the car. Hysterical
On
and missing
Carol.
one shoe. Exactly. So glad that at least
Mm.
someone escaped.
Yeah.
Hysterical and missing one shoe, Carol immediately ran out in front of another car which stopped for her as the Volkswagen drove off. Bundy had failed this time.
Ha.
But he wasn't giving up. Later that
Mm.
same day, Deborah Kent went missing from a Davis County High School car park during a school play, making Carol DeRonch's account of what happened to her that day even more important in case it was the same perpetrator, which, as we know, it was. The next
Yes.
morning, the police had found a key from a handcuff in the high school parking lot where Deborah was taken from, and it was the key for the handcuffs that had been put on Carol DeRonch.
Suspicious.
Um, yeah, so 17-year-old Deborah Kent was attending a play at Viewpoint High School with her parents. Deborah's parents had asked her if she would go and collect her younger brother from a skating rink. The rink was only around 3 miles away, so if the traffic was light, she'd be able to collect her brother and be back within about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, but a little later, when her parents went outside to the car park, they saw the car was still parked there, but there was no sign of Deborah. Um, Detective Bill Collard, who worked the case, said they knew something was terribly amiss. Sadly, her family was correct. Ted Bundy admitted years later that he had abducted Deborah from the car park and then took her back to the place he was staying at the time.
Oh my
Bundy
god.
said, Bundy said, I did keep her for a period of time, estimating that it was about 24 hours. And an officer on the tape can be heard asking if Deborah was alive during that time. And Bundy replied saying, let's see, during half of it.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Um, in November of 1974, Elizabeth Cloper called the King County Police after reading that young women were vanishing in the areas surrounding Salt Lake City. Elizabeth was interviewed in detail by Detective Randy Hergesheimer, if I'm saying that right, of the Major
Mm.
Crimes Division. By now, Ted Bundy had risen on the list of suspects, but the witness from Lake Sammamish, who was considered to be the most reliable witness, failed to identify him from a photo lineup.
Okay.
Um, in December, Elizabeth called the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office and repeated her suspicions, and Ted Bundy's name was added to their list of suspects. But at the time, there was no credible forensic evidence to link Bundy to the Utah crimes. In January of 1975, Bundy went to Seattle after his final exams to spend time with Elizabeth. Of course, Elizabeth did not tell him that she had been reporting him to the police on multiple occasions, and
Of
she
course
also
not.
made plans to visit him in Salt Lake City in August of that year. So, I'm
Oh,
going to keep reporting you because I think you're a dangerous, dodgy individual, but let's date. Um,
let's keep it together.
At this point, Bundy moved his hunting grounds to Colorado. On Sunday, the 12th of January 1975, 23-year-old Karen Eileen Campbell, who was on vacation with her fiance Raymond and his two children, was abducted from a ski resort in Snowmass Village, Colorado. The trip was a combination of business and pleasure. During the trip, Karen's fiance was planning on going to a cardiology conference in Aspen, and while he was at the seminars, Karen brought the kids sightseeing.
Mm-hmm.
The evening that Karen vanished, her fiance and the kids were relaxing in the lounge of the inn that they were staying at, and Karen had decided that she'd just go up to their room to grab a magazine. Um, but when Karen got out of the elevator on the second floor, she spotted a group of doctors who'd been at the cardiology seminar. So, she said hello, made some polite conversation with them,
Yeah.
and then moved on towards her room. Standard. Um,
Yeah.
this was the last time anyone saw Karen Campbell. As time went on, Raymond, Karen's fiance, began to wonder why she was taking so long. I mean, she's only getting a magazine. Um,
Yeah.
Not long later, his confusion turned into anxiety, and he started to worry that, maybe she just tripped and she's hurt herself, or so, something like that.
Yeah.
So Raymond decided, okay, I'm going to go upstairs, I'm going to check on her. But when he knocked on the door of their room, there was no answer. So he went to get a spare key for the room at reception. And when he went into the room, there was no sign of his fiance. And as well as there being no sign of Karen, the magazine that she'd gone to get was still in the room, and there was no sign of a struggle or anything sinister like that.
Okay, so there was no evidence whatsoever, really.
No, it was like she obviously never made it to the room by the sounds of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Obviously worried about his fiance, Raymond called the Aspen Police Department and reported Karen missing. The responding
Mm-hmm.
officers tried to the responding officers tried to assure Raymond that Karen would likely show up later after all of the bars had closed.
Excuse me.
Thanks for that. Yeah, like how disrespectful. Um,
That is disgraceful.
Raymond, obviously knowing his fiancée much better than officers who were
Then yeah.
strangers, disagreed with them and knew her disappearance was extremely out of character. Karen
Mm-hmm.
had the flu at the time as well, and she'd already declined the chance to drink alcohol when they were having dinner with some friends. The idea that she would have just disappeared off to a bar or a party without telling Raymond didn't make any sense. Um,
Exactly.
the night that night, the responding officers called Karen's description out over police radio, and patrol cars obviously kept a lookout for the missing woman. The next morning, there was still no sign of Karen. This resulted in the police getting more active, and throughout that day, um, the officers questioned the hotel's guests and they searched rooms, but unfortunately, this did not produce any leads. Um, an extensive search of the inn and the surrounding area was conducted, but the police still couldn't find any trace of Karen. 5 weeks after Karen's disappearance, her body was found by a local worker less than 3 miles from where she was staying. It was around 9 a.m. on the 17th of February when Louise Oliver was driving along Owl Creek Road, and Louise noticed that quite a lot of birds were hovering around an area on a nearby snowbank. And she was
Yeah.
like, she thought something must be attracting their attention. I'm going to check it out. So Louise made her way, after making her way about 8 yards through snow, she found the naked body of Karen.
Oh,
Um,
that's awful.
yeah, Karen's frozen remains had been there for almost 40 days.
Oh,
After the discovery of Karen's remains, it took more than 24 hours for her body to thaw out.
oh my God.
Yeah, so while waiting for her to thaw out, um, the pathologist used dental records to positively identify her. The coroner's report concluded that she had been brutally assaulted, her skull had sustained multiple heavy fractures, and the perpetrator had also slit her left earlobe with some sort of sharp instrument. After the contents of Karen's stomach had been examined, the authorities were able to determine that her murder had taken place not long after she went missing.
Oh my
It
God.
was impossible to determine whether she had been raped because of obviously decomposition and animal
Yeah.
destruction.
Yeah.
I suppose she was out there for a long time.
Yeah.
Um,
4 days, like.
Due to the fact that her clothes were missing, detectives were confident that this was a sex crime. They were also conscious of the fact women had been disappearing in the nearby states of Utah and Washington. Before Ted Bundy's execution in 1989, he confessed to the murder of Karen Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know the specifics of the crime, but Bundy admitted to, quote, doing his thing, unquote, that night.
I did my thing.
Yeah.
Mm.
Evidence also backs up his admission. On the day of Karen's disappearance, Bundy's credit card receipts show that Bundy had paid for fuel in Glenwood Springs, which is a nearby town. As well as this, the FBI analysed his Volkswagen Beetle and they found hairs that were microscopically similar to the hairs on Karen's head. Um,
Yes.
at the time of Bundy's execution, Karen's father, Robert Campbell, said, "You never really forgive someone for something like that. You just try to put it behind you. It's not important to me now. The thing I'd like to have back, I can't have."
Mm, that's
Um,
heartbreaking.
yeah, it's always so sad. But I think when you hear like what relatives and friends have said, it just makes it that bit even sadder.
Yeah, it does because
It makes it even more real than it
it
already is.
affects, yeah, like it affects more than just the victim.
Yeah, like there's a whole circle, an expanded circle of the amount of people it affects, and like it's
Yeah.
just awful. Um, the next to fall victim to Ted Bundy was 26-year-old Julie Cunningham. Julie was last seen in Vail, Colorado on the 15th of March 1975. Julie worked in a ski shop and as a part-time ski instructor at the time of her disappearance. Julie had left her apartment in the Apollo Park neighborhood early in the evening to go to a local tavern, but she disappeared before ever getting there and was never heard from again. Now, Ted Bundy was never charged in the case of Julie Cunningham, but out of the many murders he confessed to before his death, Julie was one of them and does fit the profile of his other victims. According to Bundy, he lured Julie into his car by pretending to be an injured skier on crutches and asked for help carrying his ski boots. Pretending to be injured was a common practice for him, as you've said. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he then knocked her unconscious before driving to a remote area around 80 miles west of Vale, where he raped her. Um, Bundy said that Julie regained consciousness at some point and attempted to escape, but he managed to catch her. He then strangled her before dumping her body in a shallow grave near Rife, Colorado. Uh, Bundy said that the site of the grave was in a high desert area with a circular drive and some large trees. In April of 1989, a team of experts who specialized in finding bodies brought a bloodhound to a likely spot, but the search did not turn up anything of interest.
Mm.
Julie's body still has not been found.
It's just crazy
So,
how many victims have never been found.
yeah, it's
Like,
it's just wild.
I don't think we've even mentioned half of them yet.
No, like there's still so many more. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And like the majority of them so far, even at that, like there's been like most of the bodies not found. Um, or
Yeah.
even if it's not most of them, it's still too many.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
on the afternoon of the 6th of April 1975, Denise Lynn Oliverson had a disagreement with her husband and she left their home in Grand Junction, Colorado to go on a bike ride to her parents' home to calm down. Denise's bicycle was yellow and a 10-speed model. Denise never made it to her parents' house, and the next day, searchers discovered her bicycle and sandals under a viaduct near a railroad bridge close to the Colorado River on US Route 50, which is the route that she would have likely taken, I suppose, trying to get to her parents' house. Um, Ted Bundy confessed to the murder of Denise not long before his execution. Bundy said he abducted her, killed her in his car near the Utah state line, and then dumped her body in the Colorado River. Um, on the okay, I know we warned at the start, but I'm just going to give another trigger warning again for what I'm about to go on to because the next one involves a 12-year-old.
Okay.
Um, so if you don't want to hear this part, skip on a little bit. Um, but yeah,
What if I
on
don't want to
this,
hear this part?
well, sorry, I'm
Go on.
on the 6th of May 1975, 12-year-old Lynette Dawn Culver left Alameda Junior High School in Pocatello. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's either Pocatello or Pocatello, Idaho, for her lunch break and never came back. Lynette had not told anyone of any plans to leave school, but her leaving school wasn't strange as she had a habit of skipping class. It is not known where she
Mm-hmm.
went that afternoon, but a few hours later, Lynette was seen getting on a bus at Hawthorne Junior High School. Alameda and Hawthorne Junior High are only a mile away from each other. The bus she boarded was heading to Fort Hall, which was around 10 miles north of Pocatello. Um, it is not known why Lynette would have been going to Fort Hall, and this sighting of her is the last reliable one. Lynette was last seen wearing a burgundy jacket with a fur hood and a red checkered shirt and jeans. At first, investigators thought Lynette to be a runaway.
Of course.
They had an unconfirmed report that Lynette was seen at a local Indian reservation. Again, unconfirmed report. Other
Of
tips
course.
backed up the notion that Lynette had run away from home, but not one of these tips were backed up with any evidence. As time
Okay.
passed and the Culver family had not heard from Lynette, the possibility that foul play was involved in her disappearance became even more likely. The Culver family knew that Lynette would not and could not have stayed away for so long without contacting them. The case was going cold, but the family did not lose hope. Lynette's father flew to the location of any reported sighting of her to investigate the area personally. Lynette's grandfather went back to Alameda Junior High multiple times to search for clues that may help give them an idea of what happened to her, and they just never gave up. Um, the only thing to end up connecting Bundy to the disappearance is his confession. Bundy said that he drove to Pocatello, Ohio, Idaho, even, sorry, not Ohio, Idaho, um, intent on finding a young woman to murder. He confessed that, I love how he says young woman. This is a girl. This is a
This
child,
is the child.
not a young woman.
This is the
Uh,
literal child.
he confessed that he saw Lynette at some point and abducted her. Bundy claims he took her to a hotel room where he raped her before drowning her.
Oh.
Bundy then drove to the nearby Snake River and disposed of the body there. Bundy did not know his victim's name. However, Lynette's missing persons case was the only one from Pocatello that matched Bundy's description. Um, Even though Bundy gave personal details about Lynette's murders, authorities have not completely accepted his statement. They do believe that it is also quite possible that Lynette's disappearance could relate to 4 other cases from the late 1970s and early 1980s, where girls from Pocatello were abducted and killed, which are cases that Bundy could not have been responsible for. So therefore, it's hard to
Mhm.
gauge whether Bundy really did abduct and kill Lynette or whether he's just
Yeah.
decided to try and take credit for it. So, you know, it's equally possible that it was him and equally possible that it was another perpetrator going around at that time.
Yeah.
And Lynette, because of this, Lynette remains listed as a missing person.
Oh, that's
Um,
awful.
yeah, because
She's so
obviously a body
bad.
hasn't been found. It's just his story.
She was a baby. Like, she was a child.
Yeah, it's disgraceful. On the 27th of June 1975, 15-year-old Susan Curtis disappeared while attending the Bountiful Orchard Youth Conference at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. Susan had cycled. Talk about commitment. Susan had cycled 50 miles from Bountiful to Provo
Stop.
to attend the 2-day conference.
Oh my God. Go,
I
Susan.
wouldn't even fucking cycle to the bottom of town.
No.
When I'm having a good day and it's sunny and it's in the summer and I'm in a good mood because of the sun, I might cycle out the road to my nana's, which is a good cycle, like, but still,
But not
that's at a
50 fucking
stretch,
miles.
not 50 miles. Um, so, yeah, Susan was last seen on the first day of the conference because it was a 2-day one. After a formal banquet at the Wilkinson Student Centre, Susan left her friends so that she could walk back to her dorm and brush her teeth. The walk would have been about 1/4 of a mile, and it's believed, however, that Susan never made it to her dorm because when the authorities checked her toothbrush, it was still dry.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, I thought that was a really random thing to say because I'm like,
Yeah, just her
could a
toothbrush is
toothbrush
dry. She
not dry
hasn't been home.
really quickly?
Yeah, I don't
Because
know actually.
I know they know that her toothbrush will be wet because she went back only to brush her teeth. But then again, I suppose there'd be some microscopic pieces of water surely somewhere if she had been there within the little bit and
Yeah.
brushed her teeth before disappearing. But anyway, I don't know. Um, a professor at the university might have seen Susan 4 days after she disappeared. He identified her from a photograph and said that she was wearing a blue knit top and faded blue jeans at the time, and that she was trying to sell
Hmm.
a textbook in the back of his class. Apart from this alleged
Selling a
sighting,
textbook.
she was like, I don't need it anymore. Apart from this alleged sighting, there's been nothing to point to Susan's whereabouts since the day she vanished. And it's possible that someone looked like her and it wasn't her as well. It's so
Yeah.
grain of salt on that one.
Yeah.
Susan attended Woods Cross High School at the time of her disappearance. She was on both the track team and the girls' baseball team during her freshman year. Susan had a history of running away from home for days at a time, but she was never missing for any extended period of time. Bundy confessed to murdering Susan before his execution, and he stated that he had buried her body along a highway near Price, Utah. However, a search of the area found no evidence, and Susan has never been found, and it's believed that she was a victim of Bundy. But again, it's not concrete that she was a victim of Bundy, so she is also still listed as a missing person. Oh my God, the car is so cold, I can see my breath. But yeah, exactly. In August of 1975, Bundy was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, informally known as LDS Church or the Mormon Church.
Stop.
Yeah. In Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, an interview is shown with Michael Priest, the branch president of the church Bundy had joined. Michael explained that not long after Bundy had moved to Utah in September of 1974, two church members knocked on Bundy's door. They began to chat, and Bundy expressed interest in joining their congregation. An article in the Lakeland Ledger quotes Donald Morgan, a social worker, saying, "The subject did go on outings with the LDS members and attended some meetings, but reportedly had a word of wisdom difficulty in that he did continue to smoke and drink alcoholic beverages." So the word of wisdom is a law of health for Mormons, which forbids the use of alcohol, tobacco, coffee, and tea. Try and take my tea away. I mean, well, actually, more so try and take my coffee away and see what happens. But try take my tea away.
I will.
I can survive without the alcohol and tobacco because I feel like my vape is a loophole for the tobacco. But
yes.
Then again, I'm assuming maybe vaping's probably a no-no. But what are you eating?
A sweet.
Jealous. When Bundy had problems adhering to some of the rules, while Bundy had problems adhering to some of the rules, such as the beverages and smoking and whatnot, he must have been an active enough member to form positive bonds with his fellow members. Because after he had been arrested and charged with kidnapping Carol DeRanch, members of the church came to his aid. Branch President Michael Priest said they just knew that he was innocent of all charges. Bundy was so charming that his peers had genuinely believed he could do no wrong.
He really just was so good at manipulating people.
Yeah, he was just really good at portraying this persona.
Yeah, and putting up this facade. Wild.
Well, yeah, so members of the branch that Bundy was a member of even went as far as to make him a card while he was in jail. Bundy had an entire congregation convinced that he was a perfectly normal guy, which just goes to show, as you said, just how manipulative this man was.
Oh my God. Instead of get well soon, get out soon, Ted.
Yeah, literally. I think I found a photo of it, so I'll attach it to the Instagram, the Instagram and Facebook post. Because I'm sure I saw a photo of it when I was researching, so I'll find that and I'll attach that.
Guys, Josh made us a new logo, and it's the best thing ever. It's amazing.
Yeah, the things you can do with Canva, guys. So if you're ever looking for stuff, try it Canva out. It's so handy and so easy.
Obsessed.
Now, some of you might have already seen it by the time you're listening to this because this is going up. Oh, I suppose this is going up tomorrow, isn't it, actually?
Yeah, we're last minute recording for the first time ever.
Yes, but we're going to get ahead of we're getting ahead of things now. We're on track.
Yeah, to be fair, Daisy ate my charger.
Yeah, the dog decided that charger's saucy looking. It was bless Daisy. The charger was giving her the eyes. She had to.
Yeah, it called her. It called her by her government name of Montana Wind. I swear that's Daisy's registered name.
Wait, say it again.
Montana Wind.
I actually quite like that. Like Daisy is Daisy, but Montana Wind is cute.
But she's a Daisy.
So, Jerry Cahill, a spokesperson, confirmed that in the 70s, Bundy was excommunicated from the church. Bundy's excommunication of the church occurred sometime after his conviction of kidnapping Carol DeRanch. When Bundy was asked what his religious preference was after his arrest, he said Methodist, which was the religion of his childhood.
I thought you were just going to say meth.
Yes,
my religious choice is meth.
He was a meth worshipper.
Yeah.
Although, do you know what? So the way he is as a human, I'm like, maybe he was.
Maybe.
Not that I'm exactly saying that anyone who does that is like that. Just to clarify, but I feel like if he would have. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. I'm going to move on. In the state of Washington, investigators are still having difficulty trying to analyze the Pacific Northwest murder spree that had ended as abruptly as it had begun. As you can imagine, they had a crazy amount of data. So, in an attempt to make sense of it, they resorted to compiling a database, which at the time would have been considered an innovative strategy. Um, they used the only available computer, um, well, I suppose the only computer that was available to them at the time, which was
Mm.
actually the King County payroll computer. Yeah. So after entering all the lists they had put together, classmates and acquaintances of each victim, Volkswagen owners called Ted, known sex offenders, and so on, they got the computer to search for overlays or coincidences.
Mm.
And out of the thousands of names, 26 names turned up on all four of the lists. And lo and behold,
Mm-hmm.
one of these names was Ted Bundy that was on all four of the lists. So and as well as this, detectives manually put together a list of their 100 best suspects, and Bundy was
Yeah.
also on that list. Ted Bundy
You're
was literally at the
exposed,
top of their
sir.
pile. Yeah, he was at the top of their pile of suspects.
Yeah.
Um, when word came
Unbelievable.
from Utah of his arrest, because remember, this was back where he'd moved from and stopped murdering because he was murdering the new areas. So they
Yes.
were literally only starting to see him as a fairly possible suspect, and then he was arrested in Utah, which will be your next part in next week's episode, because we never said at the start of the
Yes.
episode that this was going to be a two-parter.
Surprise,
Surprise,
motherfuckers.
surprise. So yeah, this day next week you will get part two. So that is the end of part one.
Yes.
And it's already wild. It's been very wild. And it'll get more
Yeah.
wild. Wait till you hear my next section.
just wait. Just wait.
So
Madness.
with that, we will bid you adieu. Make sure, I suppose, to check out the new profile picture, logo,
The
whatever.
new logo.
It should be on this episode as you watch anyway. And
And
once again,
I'm gonna go
we
get
love
my
you.
vape
Thanks for
before we
listening.
record part two.
Exactly. And I'm going to go to the toilet. So there,
Yeah.
priorities.
We're recording over Anchor, so apologies for the lag in this episode and the next part. But yeah, I didn't vape throughout this whole thing, so you should give us 5 stars.
5 stars for non-vaping.
Yeah.
And give all those 5 stars
So
specifically to Tanya because I am vaping. But
yeah, I'm a great
so
girl.
with that,
Okay, guys.
ciao for now.
Bye.
And ciao.